The concept of invisibility is studied by physics and perpetual psychology. From a biblical perspective, we know God, the immortal King, is an invisible spirit who is unseen, yet is understood by creation of the world, which is clearly seen. When the Lord went before the children of Israel on their exodus from Egypt, he led the way by a pillar of cloud in the daytime and a pillar of fire at night. Yet the ancient Greeks posited their theories of invisibility in the form of the cap of Hades, or the cap of invisibility, that made the wearer invisible to other supernatural entities, akin to a cloud of mist sometimes used to remain undetectable. Now, I didn't bring Greek philosophy up with biblical theology together because they are the same, rather because I want you to notice the difference. The cap of invisibility, or the cap of Hades, belonged to the god of the underworld, who is the god of the dead. God of the Bible is the God of the living. The helmet was proverbial for those who concealed their nature by a cunning device. According to a claim by former mariner Carl M. Allen, the United States Navy had conducted a number of experiments in the Philadelphia Naval Shipyard in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, in an attempt to make the destroyer escort class ship USS Eldridge invisible. The ship was named for John Eldridge Jr., who died in a plane crash while leading an operation for the invasion of Solomon Island, November 2, 1942. It is alleged that on October 28, 1943, the USS Eldridge was rendered invisible by a cloaking device and then accidentally teleported to the Naval Shipyard in Norfolk, Virginia, 200 miles away, before reappearing in Philadelphia a few hours later. This could be seen from the nearby ship SS Andrew Fearseth. Witnesses in the Norfolk Naval Shipyard in Virginia reported the Eldridge appear in the waters and disappear rapidly. The military had been testing top secret generators to make their warships completely invisible to the enemy. An object reflected a limited amount of radar energy back to the source. The factors that influence this include the material the target is made of, the size of the target relative to the wavelength of illuminating radar signal, the absolute size of the target, the incident angle at which the radar beam hits a particular portion of the target, the reflected angle at which the beams reflect off the target, and lastly, the polarization of the radiation transmitted and received with respect to the orientation of the target. Therefore, by reducing the radar cross-section, it can lower the chance of detection from radar-sensing submarines. The CIA dubbed this research initiative Project Rainbow. The object was a Lockheed U-2. The quest was to discover a way to foil Nazi radar so that they could safely transport supplies to the Allies in Europe. A cloaking device isolates a region of space from passing electromagnetic waves. Other schemes, such as trapeze, were used to reduce VHF reflections. Gradient index materials, or metamaterials, are what are used to provide a cloaking effect. Their precise shape, geometry, size, and orientation, and arrangement gives them their smart properties, capable of manipulating electromagnetic waves by blocking, absorbing, enhancing, or bending waves. The first concept was the addition of a material which became known as wallpaper, developed by the Lincoln team at Lockheed. It was made of a pattern that allowed heat and energy to travel through it, or having a conducive element. The flexible sheet, called a grid, was glued over a honeycomb and then applied to the main body of the aircraft. The object is there, but incident waves are guided around it. These electromagnetic metal materials respond to chosen parts of radiated light, composed of materials smaller than the selected wavelength of light. The macroscopic properties can be directly controlled by adjusting elements throughout the material. Allen had sent a copy of a book by Morris K. Jessup titled The Case for the UFO, Unidentified Flying Objects, to the U.S. Office of Naval Research. The book contained information about levitating UFOs. He also began sending warnings to Jessup not to investigate. Further letters spoke of research which intended to use unreleased research of Albert Einstein's unified field theory to surround the ship with a special force field. The experiment took place under Dr. Franklin Reno. All claims were considered a hoax because such things defy physics. After the release of the 1988 film, The Philadelphia Experiment, a man by the name of Al Bielek came forward to claim he was on board of the Eldridge when it disappeared. Bielek had been a part of another government experiment called the Montauk Project. Al Bielek had also come to the conclusion that his name wasn't Al Bielek. He was actually Edward Cameron. He and his brother Duncan had worked on the Philadelphia Experiment in their mid-20s and then brainwashed to forget it. He recalls the experiment started in 1931 at the University of Chicago with Nikola Tesla, Dr. John Hutchinson, and Emil Kurtenhauer. The men did a feasibility study to see if invisibility was even possible. In 1934, the experiment transferred from the University of Chicago to the newly formed Princeton in New Jersey. It is so called the Philadelphia Experiment because the final experiments were conducted there. Nikola Tesla, born 1856, had proposed an AC theory whereby a magnetic field or magnet is rotated along a stationary set coil or rotation of coil around a stationary magnetic field. When he was introduced to Thomas Edison in 1884, he worked with him 6 months, then met then president of Western Union Corporation who had faith in him and funded his first laboratory for $35,000. After becoming part of the Institute of Electrical Engineers, he met John Westinghouse while attending a lecture, who bought over 200 patents from him for $1 million cash. In 1940, they had a fully successful test of invisibility in Brooklyn, New York, using Tesla's design of full analog system, and a 250-ton Navy tender became completely invisible to the naked eye. Then he was given a real ship. The Germans were also working on invisibility using submarines. 3 test subs used were made invisible and never seen again, so the program was abandoned. Cameron claimed that sometime in the 1940s, Nikola Tesla figured out how to make the USS Eldridge invisible, and in the process opened up a time wormhole into the future that sucked in the ship. Dr. Levinson developed the time equations and time matrix necessary for that Philadelphia experiment. When the USS Eldridge returned to the Philadelphia shipyard, the radio mast was broken, the people were milling on the deck. On board, men were seen dying, having been buried in the steel of the ship. The crew experienced nausea, insanity, and burn marks. Others reported falling through the floor and walls while the time the ship was missing. 4 men did die, including Edward and Duncan's younger brother. The military being warned that the Japanese were going to attack Pearl Harbor, the Cameron brothers were told not to be there and given a work order in San Francisco. The brothers saw this as a means of escape. The Cameron brothers on board jumped off the vessel and landed at Montauk's Camp Hero. They were spotted by the bright lights of a helicopter, an aircraft that had not yet been known, and taken upstairs to the room of the former Office of Navy Engineering. They met with an elderly man who claimed to be von Orman, a man who they had worked with prior on the experiment. The date, he said, was August 12, 1983, 40 years later. With the men confused, Orman explained that they were no longer in 1943, but 1983, and they were part of the Montauk Project dealing with time travel. Edward Cameron testifies that they told him, "We can send you anywhere we want and any time we want." At the meeting of these two times, it caused a wormhole, a hole in the space-time continuum. When Eldridge came back in 1983, the hole closed behind him. The Eldridge brothers' final mission had been to return to 1943 and destroy the equipment. All logbooks prior to 1941 had their pages ripped out. The crew believed they were brainwashed to keep the secret. Some of those who spoke out vehemently were never seen again or sent on assignments where they die in battle. Edward Dungeon, a Navy electrician stationed on a nearby USS Instrom, claimed that indeed devices were placed on his ship to make them invisible.